Hello, and welcome to the Sound of Economics from Bruegel, the Brussels-based economic policy think tank. I'm André Sapir, Senior Fellow at Bruegel, and today we are here for an installment of the Bruegel Backstage series focusing on the ASEM Summit that is taking place tomorrow here in Brussels, and what it means not just for Europeans and for Asians, but for the world in general. Joining me today are Professors Moonsung Kang from Korea University, PhD from University of Wisconsin in Madison, and Professor Mike Plummer, the director of SAIS Europe, a part of Hopkins University, where I got my PhD from. So I'm very glad to meet people who are, I got my PhD from Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, long time ago. And then I went on to teach at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. So Great. The three of us have a close link, and all three of us are trade economists. So the ASEM relation is not just about trade, but certainly trade is one of the crucial components. So turning to you, Moonsung, how do you see the relationship between Asian countries and European countries at this junction?
Well, Asia, Asia is one of the hot areas in terms of international trade. As you know, when you look at the trade data, there would be three hot areas in the world. One of them, actually, the North America and Europe, definitely, and also East Asia. There are a lot of trade is going on, but Asian countries, in a sort of a globalized world, Asian countries want to have much closer relationship with Europe because Europe, especially European countries, invest a lot of money in Asia, including China, Japan, and South Korea, even Southeast Asian countries. Okay, so in that sense, I believe much closer relationship between Asia and Europe in tandem. Definitely, it could have a more common economic prosperity between two regions.
Mike, you are an American. You live in Europe. You have been living in Bologna, where you are the director of the SAIS Center for a number of years. So you know well Europe. You know very well Asia. You've done a lot of work on US-Asia relations. And from your perspective, an American, but who lives in Europe and who knows well Asia, how do you see? For the moment, let's talk about just the relationship between Europe and Asia. How do you see that unfolding? I remember when I used to live in the US, there was very little, and that's a while ago, but there was very little relation, in fact, between Europe and Asia. There was a lot of relation between US and Europe, and a lot of relation already between US and Asia. But the Europe-Asia relation was very, very underdeveloped. And today it's taking a much greater importance. So, how do Americans see that?
Well, in my view, very unfortunately, the U.S. administration, the new administration, has decided to take a step back from global integration. The United States was a main protagonist of cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region, and it is stepping out sidelines. It was very active in the Trans-Pacific Partnership and is now seemingly withdrawing from its leadership role it's traditionally played at the global level. And so we have Asia and Europe that are stepping up, it seems, to go into more cooperation. I think that Europe has understood that the gravity of the global economy has shifted to Asia, and this is true from the data and is something that is going to continue. And Europe has a great deal of experience in terms of integration and integration accords. So I see something very interesting is that even though the U.S. has withdrawn, the European Union has been very proactive in formulating new agreements. Most recently, of course, the EU-Japan agreement. It also has agreements with Canada and Singapore and Korea. It is now sitting down with Australia and New Zealand negotiating things. It's thinking about a framework agreement with ASEAN. So it is stepping up to the plate. Asia is also moving forward without the United States. As everyone knows, the United States pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but this has been reformulated in a very similar agreement called the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. That is moving forward with other Asian countries lining up to join. So what we see is both Europe and Asia cooperation directly between themselves and in the global economy, showing a leadership role that the United States seems to have relinquished. And I think that is very important. We could talk about the economics, but even from the leadership point of view, I think it's critical, this cooperative relationship. And so ASEM has never been so important before.
Very well. I would tend to agree with what you just said. I think we are certainly in a very, very different configuration than what we had been in the past. I would say that what President Trump has unleashed is not perhaps a real change of heart on the part of the United States. My sense is that he has expressed deep unease in the United States with the way the global system and the relationship within the global system, the relationship between the US on the one hand and Asia, and on the other hand with Europe, were developing for a while. In a sense, the rise of Asia and the rise of Europe compared to the United States. I mean, the United States did obviously play the major role after World War II in setting up the multilateral system, and I think did play that role roughly up to the creation of the WTO in the mid-1990s, and that was roughly the start of political changes, geopolitical changes, and where the United States itself started to wonder how to react to that. And I recall that this is also the time when the US had always been, putting all of its emphasis on the multilateral system, did start to get interested in bilateral agreements. It's exactly that time. And there's been this hesitation. And now we come with President Trump, who seems not to have the hesitation anymore, who wants to put aside the multilateral system and, to put the entire emphasis on bilateral deals. So it's not that he doesn't want to do trade agreements, but doesn't want to do agreements with regions or at the multilateral level. And as you know, yesterday, the USTR, the trade representative, the Minister of Trade from the United States, did send a letter to Congress saying that the US administration will launch negotiations not only with Europe and with the UK, but also with Japan. So, Professor Kang, let's be a bit more specific. Let's talk a little bit about Korea. Okay. Now, EU and Korea have a trade agreement for several years. There is also an agreement between Korea and the United States. How does Korea see those trade agreements? Are those agreements substitute for multilateral rules? Are they complements? In what manner?
Well, Korea has pretty good network of free trade agreements. Okay, actually, as you mentioned, Korea has a bilateral FTA with the European Union and the United States and also China. Okay, so actually these three countries and region is one of the hot areas in the world right now. Okay, so in that sense, I think Korea has a pretty good network of free trade agreements. Frankly speaking, the Korean government is focusing more on regional trade talks rather than multilateral trade talks. Okay, I don't think Korea is the only country who is conducting this kind of trade policy in the way. But a multilateral trading system is definitely important because, as you know, Korea is a sort of a small country. Actually, it's really hard to fight against the politically big countries, such as the United States or China. If we have any conflicts with big countries, then definitely we can bring a case to the WTO. Okay, so in that sense, WTO is really important.
Can I interrupt you on this and ask you a little bit to elaborate on the recent dispute with the United States about steel, and how did Korea react to the pressure from the United States, the bilateral pressure?
Yeah. After the Trump administration, actually, yes, Korea had a lot of pressures from the U.S. and Korea was asked to renegotiate KORAS-FTA, Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. Actually, we can call them the amendment. The negotiation was over, and then both countries just agreed the legal contents, and then actually they are waiting for the domestic approval. Okay, definitely Korea needs to get the approval from the National Assembly and the U.S. Definitely the U.S. Congress. Okay, at that time, actually Korea and the U.S. just negotiated steel issues. Okay, so what they agreed, Korea had a sort of import quota. Okay, so they set a sort of upper cap that Korea can export certain amount of steel to the U.S. market. Okay,
sort of a voluntary export restraint.
That's right. Okay, as you know, the VR, voluntary export restraint, is prohibited during the Uruguay round. However, two countries agreed. Okay, even though the government officials are saying that that's not VR, but definitely I think it's a VR. Okay, somehow the U.S. and the South Korean government just simply violated WTO rules. Okay, so it's a shame actually.
So Mike, again coming back to you, with the U.S. perspective, I think the steel episode. Earlier this year, we just heard that Korea was obliged to accept essentially WTO illegal measures, voluntary export restraints. The US is saying that it's very unhappy with the way the appellate body has been working. So the U.S. is clearly behaving in a manner, at least the current U.S. administration is clearly behaving in a manner that sounds that potentially it may be either destructive of the system or putting itself on the margin of the system. And one of the questions that I'm sure European and Asian leaders will talk about, if only on the margin of the summit tomorrow, is how together, Asians and Europeans should behave towards the multilateral system if indeed the US continues to be on the margin and to behave in a sort of WTO illegal manner, as sort of a rogue citizen. Now, the Asians and the Europeans have pronounced themselves very much in favor of the multilateral system, even though both are engaged in all kinds of bilateral agreements, but I think but politically they do want to sustain the system. What do you think would be the U.S. reaction? Would the U.S. see that as a threat and come back to the table because no, I don't want to leave the multilateral system in the hands of the Europeans and the Asians, and be on the margin of the system? Or the US will have the opposite reaction, say, well, okay, what the hell, you guys want to handle the system. We were there at the creation, we created it. No, it's your turn to do this. And we'll see in a few years whether we like it or not.
That's a very interesting question. Let me preface it by saying first that I think that the midterm elections in November will very be very important in answering that question. I think that if it goes in one direction, for example, if the Republicans lose the House and perhaps the Senate, this will have a influence on the Trump administration, which actually I think will be pro-free trade and more going towards a multilateral system. If not, I could see us going in the same direction. So prefacing from that. A second thing to remember is that it's not just about the economics. It's about the political narrative. And the U.S., it is true the U.S. has played a leadership role.
Domestic political or geopolitical? Domestic.
It's completely domestic. As a matter of fact, it's been negative for the geopolitical aspect of it. And this is it's something we've seen clearly from the Republican administration pulling out of the TPP. On our own estimates show that there would be foregone income, which I think is significant. But much more important was the fact that the Asians have perceived the U.S. has been pulling back. But even though the U.S. has gained a great deal from this system, it is that part of this narrative is that bilateral imbalances, or if you will, the U.S. trade deficit has been a function of if you will, nefarious or anti-American trade policies on the part of our partners. Now, you and I know from studying economics that trade balances are determined by other things, net national savings and things, but this is the point that he's been pushing on, always on and that's why he's talking about the bilateral. I mean, he's even mentioned he wants to have these bilateral agreements because that way he can, increase his leverage in the agreements. So I think part of this we have to remember is it's a political narrative. It's not a very flattering one for trade. And I think, for example, if I mentioned these ideas of having the free trade area with the EU, the UK, and Japan, I think, again, is part of a narrative. First of all, you remember the TTIP was supposed to be finished on one tank of gas. We found out it's a very complicated thing to do. So engaging in trade talks with the EU was difficult under Obama. You can imagine what it's going to be like under Trump. Japan, what is Japan going to come to the table with? The TPP, the only way that Japan was willing to give up its access to agricultural markets was by being part of that big agreement, not part of the auto agreement was only supposed to be liberalized after 2030. So I don't see that going through with the bilaterals.
But where are we headed for the U.S. role in at the WTO? I'm trying to. I think that get an answer to that.
I think that the U.S. is going to continue. I mean, we've got the appellate body thing. I think that some of the policies it has embraced has not been consistent with WTO rules, and I think that Trump himself has actually said he'd be willing to pull out of the WTO. So I don't think
this is a possibility?
No, I don't. But I think that he will not be very active in trying to push forward these multilateral agreements.
More dormant than antagonist.
Yeah.
Very well. I think that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening to Bruegel Backstage on the Sound of Economics channel. And thank you to my guests, Professor Kang from Korea University, Professor Plummer from SAIS Bologna, Johns Hopkins University. If you are interested in more of Bruegel's work, we have an array of blog posts and publications available at our website, www.bruegel.org. I hope you'll join us again, and until next time, bye-bye.